Welcome back to the Read Along Book Club of Yoko Ogawa's Memory Police. We are definitely winding things up a little bit. I don't feel like the pace is moving along as quickly as other books might at this place in the novel because there's only a few chapters left, and I'm incredibly anxious to see how this thing ends because I have so many questions. So far, the author has given us many possibilities to concoct in our minds, but she's given us little hints here and there, but nothing concrete. That is the mark of a great author. Clearly, someone who is writing a story that is unpredictable. Speaking of unpredictability, another thing I find interesting about this book is that she sets up a lot of things, like the old man getting captured that I brought up, the dog, probably some other things I'm going to forget, and things just kind of work out. Nothing absolutely terrible has happened yet. I mean, R is definitely stuck in this little cramped space, living in her basement, but no one has died. Well, somebody has died. The old man, he dies at the very end of this section. But the beginning of this section offers a very unique development, and I'm curious what it's going to mean. So, with that said, let us get into chapter 20. As the old man had predicted, I soon found another job. The head of the neighborhood association made an introduction for me at a trading company run by an acquaintance. A typist? I said. That doesn't interest you? I don't have much experience. But I repeated the word typist silently to myself several times. It seemed to have a special significance. Of course it does. We know. It's the novel she's writing. The novel that she has, that has disappeared, essentially, right? There's a very interesting section that's going to come up very quickly about how she's trying to write again. And I really like the author's approach. She's done it a couple times because, as I said way back when I first read the description of this novel and something disappeared, I thought it like literally disappeared. It didn't necessarily mean that the concept of what it was disappeared, which is what we have right here. And I really like this because it's hard to comprehend, honestly. And the writer does a very great job at showing us what this might feel like. So typist repeated itself in my head. I tried to recover my faded memory, but it remained distant and vague. So I'm just wondering, what is the significance here? Is this a literary coincidence, or does this mean something bigger? I don't know. I have these weird ideas running around in my head that maybe because she's a writer, which is extremely significant to, what is happening, right? Having the power over words, essentially. I don't know. I've just been thinking maybe she's in control of this. Maybe this novel we're reading is her concoction. I have no idea, and that's why I'm so anxious to get to the end of this. And so I came to work at a spice company, and the rhythm of my days changed drastically. So she's away from home quite a bit. Rather than writing in her little nook or wherever she writes at whenever she wants, she now has a regular job. And my duties included dusting, answering the phone, and some basic filing. And I was lent a portable typewriter and a typing manual and asked to practice at home. And she also received gifts of food from some of their clients, like sausage and cheese and corned beef, which had long since vanished from the market. So we do know that food is hard to come by. And so she's got some extra perks here. But I understand why I had reacted so strongly to the word typist when I reread the manuscript I'd given R for safekeeping. And this is the part where she is carefully examining the manuscript, beginning from the first page, but the work never went smoothly. So she's trying different strategies. She's trying to write out these vowels. And this is what's interesting too, and I'm curious if this is a parallel or if it's just a coincidence again. But because I'm sensing so many little things that the author took so much care to establish in this book, I have to feel like it's purposeful, right? But she's trying to writing A-I-U-E-O. That's weird because the vowels when we say them is A-E-I-O-U. So it's fun. It's kind of weird. It's like A B C D E F G. It's just something. It's a rhythm that's in your head, and seeing it differently here is strange. But what I'm getting at is that toward the end of this section, he has a harmonica. R has a harmonica, and she tries to do the do re fi or whatever it is. And so that was a cool parallel. At least I hope it was. Seeing her trying to recall how to write again. But you shouldn't force the memories. Just try to untangle them slowly, R told me. I'd apologized for handing him a blank sheet of paper, but his response was encouraging and showed no sign of disappointment. So we know that R's role in this entire thing is trying to coax memory back, right? He's the person here that she's essentially keeping prisoner to a degree, very much like her own novel, as I discussed in the last episode. But yeah, he's here to, I guess, hopefully coax. I can't speak right now. Hopefully to coax her memory back. but he took me in his arms, as he always did now. The bed was soft and warm, his skin was growing whiter and whiter, and his muscles seemed more visible than ever. His hair had grown out and hung down over his eyes. Oh, that's right. The old man gives him a haircut. I forgot about that. But then he read aloud my story about the typist. To me, it sounded like a fairy tale from a distant land. And that's really cool because it did sound like a fairy tale. I remember when we were reading these sections in the book, and I'm really curious if we're ever going to see anything else of this novel because there's not much left. But it had this dreamlike, fantastical element to it, and it really kind of almost Neil Gaiman in a way, magical realism you could call it, where it's taking place in the real world more or less, but it has these strange elements, these fantastical elements. How she's using the love story between a typist and a typing teacher. And then it turned into some kind of weird control fantasy. I'm not quite sure, but I really like that, and it kind of made me think of playing around with things like that in my own work because I think we try to jam ourselves into genres too often, and we don't just tell the story that needs to be told. Maybe it's a Western thing. I'm not quite sure, but I do love how she's handling it here. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Murakami, at least what little I've read. Does it tire you out to be doing something you're not used to? Asked the old man as he arranged the teapot and cups on the table. No, everyone is nice to me, I told him, and I'm enjoying the work. And this is when they are meeting at the boat, and of course, they're having some pancakes. Typing is hard, but I enjoy practicing. As soon as your fingers start to move, a sentence appears almost effortlessly. It's like magic. Another time she's talking or referring to magical. She just referred to it as a fairy tale. And it has me wondering, like, why didn't she ever type stories? I know some writers out there, Neil Gaiman again, I'll bring him up. I know he drafts every first draft by hand. Maybe there's some kind of tactility to it. Maybe it's the analog nature of it. Maybe it's you're physically doing the work. It's not translated through a computer. Anyway, I'm not quite sure. But when we finished eating, the old man went to find the music box hidden in the bathroom. And Don, too, eyed the music box with some interest. Each time we would rewind the mechanism and the music would start again. His ears would twitch and he would back away, belly pressed to the floor. So does that mean that animals, too, forget or something? Because you'd think that a music box wouldn't be too offensive to a dog. One thing that's strange about dogs, I have a couple dogs, is that loud music doesn't really offend them, or if you're watching a movie loudly, but just certain frequencies do, obviously. But what always interests me about dogs is how it's not necessarily the volume of things. Like I'll have my dogs, I'll be watching a movie pretty loud, action-packed, and dogs are just kind of sleeping on the couch. I'm sorry, I don't know why this turned into a dog conversation. This one might be a little bit longer. I feel a little bit more rambly for some reason. But still, I continued, why do you suppose I thought of writing a story about a typist? I'd barely ever used a typewriter, had any friends who were typists. It's strange. It is strange, and I like the fact that she is noting that as well. So not only are we as the reader questioning it, we're getting it from the POV character here. Oh, and another thing, speaking of characters, Lee out there, man, thank you. He mentioned this on the Discord, so again, if you're not on the Discord, highly recommend it. He said, isn't R the only named character in this book? And I'm like, yeah. Because it was funny when I was recording these videos, like I was constantly thinking of, who do I call the narrator? Because it never says her name. And I remember looking up the description of the book, hoping it would tell her name, and it doesn't. So yes, in fact, R is the only named person in this entire thing. So what does that mean? What does that mean? I hope we know by the end. Clearly, he is a crucial character, right? He's the one who can't forget things, and he is trying to coax these memories or bring her soul back into her heart or something like that. And R, it's a letter. That's it. It's strange. But anyway, let's move on. Apparently, no one blames you for lying in a novel. You can make up the story out of nothing, starting from zero. You write about something you can't see as though you can see it. You make up something that doesn't exist just by using words. That's why R says we shouldn't give up, even if our memories do. So to me, that's saying a lot, knowing our protagonist is a writer. And I'm not sure what it means. Hopefully it all makes sense by the end of this. But I'm really enjoying the subtlety of this book. So many novels out there, particularly Western ones, rely so heavily on plot, so heavily on story beats. This one is very flowy. I mean, there's not really any major plot beats. Things happen, things don't happen. But for some reason, I'm still drawn to this. Maybe it's the mystery. Maybe it's the cozy nature of this island, the small cast. I'm not quite sure. And the old man is not sure if he should be asking this, but you're in love with him, aren't you? And unsure of how to answer, I reached down and put my arms around Don's neck. The dog's eyes opened with annoyance, and he let out a sound half cough and half burp. Then he slipped out of my embrace, ran once around the cabin, and came back to the same spot. I suppose. But do you think you'll ever be able to come out of hiding? That's the big question. Is she going to keep her lover in the basement forever? And at the very end, we get a random earthquake, the old man cried. This was funny. So, things happen here and there. This seems to happen for no reason other than just happening. But that brings us to chapter 21. When the shaking stopped and I opened my eyes again, the first thing I saw amid the debris was Dawn, hiding under the couch, trembling with fear. And we find the old man trapped under the dish cabinet and covered with shards of shattered plates. His face was bloody. And this was interesting because she's constantly asking about his health. Obviously, right here, are you okay? But also throughout these sections of chapters. But what's interesting is it doesn't really amount to anything. I mean, we're given kind of a cliffhanger, so we don't necessarily know how the old man dies. But I'm willing to bet that it has nothing to do with his wounds. I just feel like the trend that she has been setting for us with setting up things and then just not necessarily resolving them in a way that we expect. But we'll find out. And he mentions that there is a tsunami that is going to come. And he urges her to just leave him there. But she doesn't, of course, because this old man is very important to her. And I don't recall how we managed to escape the shattered boat or which way we went after we left the dock. But when we finally stopped to catch our breath, we found ourselves among the ruins of the library halfway up the hill, surrounded by others who had also taken refuge from the earthquake. And here we have a great description of this tsunami. So the scene in front of us was transformed in an instant. It seemed as though the sea were being simultaneously drawn up into the sky and sucked down into a hole in the earth. The floodwaters mounted high and higher and higher, threatening to wash over the entire island, and the people around us began to wail and moan. The sea swallowed up the boat, washed over the seawall, and smashed the houses along the coastline. So, very devastating, definitely. And in his hands, he held just one thing, the music box, totally unharmed despite all we had been through. So clearly, even though he can't remember what this is and he can't appreciate the music, he knows something is very special about this thing. And some neighborhoods in the town were damaged as well. From the outside, her house seemed to have escaped with only minor damage. And this is when they're worried about R because her entire house could have collapsed on him. But our greatest concern, here we go, was to see how this little space suspended between floors had fared in the earthquake. And here we go again. We think, oh man, the earthquake, the tsunami, we see the village being destroyed, the shoreline being destroyed. Maybe R is dead. Oh my God, this is the only thing that is going, this is the only person who can help her remember. But no, I'm fine. How are you? I've been worried about both of you, but I can't tell what's going on there. I just started to wonder what would happen to me if no one came back. Well, they're back, R. You're all right, man. Though we were separated from R by no more thickness than a single board, the voice sounded distant and weak. But they managed. They get him out. It's no big deal. The old man worked quietly and precisely, as he always did, and in no time at all the trapdoor had been opened, see? Again, we kind of are set up with some kind of potentially devastating thing for everything to be okay again. I know I keep repeating that, but I think it's going to be very important. At least I hope it's very important by the time we get to the end. And this is when the ex-hat maker shows up, and she talks about him, the old man, having eczema, which is her way to satisfy his curiosity, I guess. But R, crouching at the bottom of the ladder, was looking up at us with an expression of exhaustion and relief. His hair was flecked with chips of wood from the shattered floor. We made our way down the ladder, uttering meaningless grunts and greeting as we patted and embraced one another. But we did not need to move, content to hold hands and stare at one another for a long time. Oh, isn't that cute? Which brings us to chapter 22. And the town never did completely recover. People made attempts to repair their homes, but the cold and shortages of materials slowed the work. Mud, sand, and the ruins of collapsed houses remained piled along the streets, and dirty snow covered all, making for a pitiful sight. So the snow has not changed because we know seasons can't change. Time is literally standing still, which is, again, it makes me wonder, are we going to be in some kind of snow globe at the end of this? Is this all a simulation? And on the afternoon of the third day after the quake, I was out walking near my office along the street where the tramway ran when I spotted the Inuis. So she thinks she does. What she does see is the gloves. And I love that because we do know that way in the past, I think she cut his fingernails and he had to wear the gloves or something like that. And And so now we're bringing back that imagery, and I love the foresight of that, because it seemed to stand out to me as something strange, right? There's something significant, because there was a decent portion of time in that chapter about our narrator trimming his fingernails, and here it is satisfied. And I stood with my hand on the doorknob of the stationer's, trying not to stare at the truck. Still, I caught sight. This is the memory police truck, by the way. Still, I caught sight of the gloves peeking out from the one corner of the canvas cover that had been turned up. Startled, I stared at those gloves, a small sky blue hand knit pair with a strand of chain stitching to hold them together. They belonged to the Inui's boy. I remember that I had cut his fingernails for him in my basement. I really love that image. It kind of reminds me of Nazis rounding up Jews or something like that. They're these prisoners. They're in this giant truck, just crammed in there, miserable, and they're being taken to be questioned or possibly dead. Everybody, with the exception of the old man who has visited there, I think has died, right? Anybody she knows anyway. And so I almost love that even more. I kind of love that she doesn't necessarily know it's them. I mean, maybe it's a family who found the gloves. Who knows what's happened to them? To me, that's, even more powerful than her knowing without a doubt that it is them. But I'd heard rumors that people who had been hiding were forced to wander the streets when their homes were destroyed by the earthquake, the fires that followed it, and that the memory police had been rounding them up and taking them into custody one after the other. All I could do was pray that someone had continued to cut the little boy's fingernails and that the blue gloves were still protecting him. That's such a great little character aside, because, and in life we notice small things a lot of times, and for some reason we might latch onto something that is seemingly insignificant, but it holds some kind of significance for us. And, that's the last time she saw the boy, and trimming his nails, like being very motherly to him. And I really love that image was brought back here. It's a great example of how you can have these very powerful small moments in stories. And now that the boat is gone, the old man came to live in my house. Well, her house. I'd already decided this would be the best and had begun preparations for the move, so it was no trouble for me. But she does notice, the wound on your face doesn't seem to be healing very quickly. You should take it easy, I told him. No time for that. It's easier just to get this kind of thing done all at once. By the way, I ran into the man who lives across the street, and he asked me about my eczema. Said he could still see the traces of it on my face, and told me to take care of myself. And he laughed as I went off, tapping here and there with his hammer. While the old man and I were cleaning up the basement, we found some mysterious objects. So this is the part I forgot to mention at the beginning of the video. They find all of these sculptures, and then I think it's R who says maybe she hid them somewhere else, which leads them to this cabin in the woods. But inside the cupboard were my mother's sculptures, the ones that the Inuits had left with me for safekeeping, fallen now from the shelves where they had been stored. We sat down for a few moments and just looked in silence at the objects peeking out from the broken statue. One was a rectangular piece of paper folded over a number of times, and it had yellowed and was ripping at the creases. There were letters and numbers barely visible on it. The second was a metallic square about the size of a chocolate bar. Tiny holes covered the side of it. That's the harmonica. And finally, there was a plastic bag that contained several white tablets that looked like medicine. Ramune, I think that's what it's called. And I remember way back in the read-along, I was talking about how, what is this, like a Hellraiser puzzle box? And it seems to be that. We'll see. What should we do with them, I asked. I wonder. And the old man reached out to pick up the metal bar, but his hand was trembling. What's the matter? I asked him. Oh, nothing at all. I'm just a little nervous seeing all these unusual things. If something's wrong with the arm, show me. So again, she's planting the seed that this old man has become injured. He's on death's door. And he does in fact die at the end, but we don't quite know yet if it's due to his injuries. And R asks, did your mother make other sculptures between the time she got the summons and the day they took her away? I'm not sure. And she didn't store her work anywhere else. The only place I can think of is the cabin we have up near the source by the river. Still, I bet that's where they are, to protect them from the memory police. And he's going through all of the items. And this is a ticket for a ferry. And here he is, again, trying to coax for memories. And I remember only one thing. I remember how it looked when I saw it with my mother in the basement. It was folded just like it is now, sitting quietly there in the drawer. When I pulled the handle, the paper seemed to tremble as if I'd startled it. And I recall my mother as she unfolded it as gently as you just did. It was always night when I went to the basement, with the moon shining through the high window. The room was strewn with splinters of wood and pieces of stone and plaster. The river whispered outside. My mother's warm, strong hands were dirty, crusted with modeling clay and cuts from her chisels. I think I touched the ticket too. I took it from her as carefully as I could, looking back and forth between her and the ticket. I felt my heart beating hard, though not from the pleasure or excitement exactly. It was more that I was afraid that the ticket would slip through my fingers and be lost. But my mother gave me an encouraging smile. The ticket was nothing more than a worn scrap of paper that might have been rescued from a trash can, and I had no idea why she had guarded it with such care. Still, not wanting to disappoint her, I treated it as carefully as she had. In doing this, saying this almost in a single breath, as she notes, a pain ran through her chest, deep under her ribs. And she's disappointed that she's not truly giving R what he wants, but he says, it's not about satisfying me, it's about waking up your sleeping soul. Another very Eastern concept. When the surface of your soul begins to stir, I imagine you want to capture the sensation in writing, because that's how you've written all your novels, he said. And he began to breathe in and out, his eyes smiling, and as he did, sounds began to emerge from the bar. And this is when he's playing the harmonica. It's a harmonica, he says. Harmonica. I repeated as though drinking each syllable from his mouth. But this reminds her that she had taken organ lessons when she was a girl. And this right here, the do, me, so, and re, and fa, A, E, I, O, U, same number, significance? I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments. But then this last item, it's called ramune, I believe. It's a lemon-flavored candy. And she decides she wants to share the rest with the old man. But that evening, R told me the stories associated with each of the three objects, the ferry ticket, the harmonica, and the ramune, were lined up neatly on the bed. And he was telling her about the ferry right here. The ferry made just 4 round trips a day, but the dock on the northern island was as lively as a market. They sold ice cream, popcorn, baked apples, candy, and ramune. And he told me he had once played the harmonica at a school concert when the conductor's baton snapped in two and everyone burst out laughing, interrupting the performance. How his grandmother used to produce ramune from the pocket of her apron and feed them to him one after the other until one day they made him sick. I highlighted this last point not because it was powerful to me, but because I feel like it's kind of lost in translation. So let me read it. Let me know what you think if you thought the same thing. I was content now to simply listen innocently to everything he said, like a child with the hem of her skirt spread, waiting to receive God's chocolate from heaven. I know what she's getting at. The words here used were very strange. Obviously there's a girl here trying to catch God's bounty, right? But waiting to receive God's chocolate from heaven, that's not a Western expression, and maybe it's an Eastern expression, but translated to English, it just struck me funny. Which brings us to chapter 23. The next Sunday, I decided to visit my mother's cabin with the old man, since R had said she might have left more sculptures there than that concealed secrets. We took the train to the base of the mountain and then walked an hour along the road by the river, reaching the cabin just before noon. And the cabin was barely recognizable as a building. So the roof is caved in. It's not in a good shape whatsoever. I had spotted a small lump under the work table, something that seemed different from the rest of the rubble around, as soft and damp, almost slimy, but with spiky bits sticking out here and there, a shape that was melting on itself and giving off a terrible stench. So we find a dead cat. And the sculptures were scattered about the room. They were more abstract, having been fashioned from scraps of wood and stone arranged in such a way that it would be easy to extract what lay within. A number of them were already broken and their contents spilling out. But they pack up in 2 backpacks and a suitcase, and they head back to the train. And yet again, we're given something that could be a cliffhanger. No, the old man said, they're checking the bags. The memory police had just closed the ticket gate and were ordering the passengers to form 2 lines. But they're talking about rumors of people hiding up outside of the town because it's too dangerous there. But apparently they found a man in a cave. This part kind of struck me. Let me know what you guys think about it. But she says, but we're the ones kept waiting. I wish they would hurry up. So it seemed kind of weird because they're nervous about being caught, but she wants them to hurry up. Now, maybe that she's just like, I want to get it over with. Maybe that's how I should have read it. But for me, it just kind of took me aback. And I don't know if it's just the way it's written with the dialogue. But let me know what you think. Did that kind of take you aback because she's worried about being caught? Yes, she wants them to hurry up. And the luggage searches took only a moment and were limited to a quick glance inside open bags. I'm going to tell you a funny story about me that I haven't told many people, but this little line, this passage reminded me of it. So when I was in junior high, middle school for other people out there, but I'm an old guy. We called it junior high back then. I, I was 13, 12, something like that. But anyway, I had a dirty magazine. Yes, I had a dirty magazine. A friend of mine, we would actually steal. Don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody. Good thing the bookstore is closed, but periodically after school, we would go take dirty magazines from this bookstore, and we would trade them, I guess. I know it sounds pretty gross and ridiculous, but I was a 12, 13-year-old kid at the time. So I was bringing this magazine back to give back to him. And I was in band, and if you guys have ever been in band, I'm not sure, but it's situated. I can't even think of the word, but it's a circular. It's almost like it's a series of benches, and it's the woodwinds up front, and then it goes to the brass, and then at the very back is the percussion. And a girl's purse was stolen, and so what did they do? They decide to call the principal into the room and search everybody's bags. Yeah, that's where the story is going. Here I am, sitting here. I think I was like in the second row or something like that. And the principal is coming up to search my bag, and I have a magazine. Now, this isn't the Playboy, mind you. Okay, this is dirtier stuff. I had a Hustler magazine. Yes, a Hustler. You heard me right. In my backpack, and I was absolutely petrified. So I felt very much like our narrator and the old man here, who are about ready to get caught. Luckily, like he said, well, she wasn't interested in my papers. She was definitely interested in looking in my bag, but I quickly just said, "Hey, look, there's no purse here." I kind of shuffled through my binder and kept the magazine pressed to it, and she did not look too closely. So I got away with it. It's funny. That memory is just stuck in my head, and this one really just brought it back. It brought back that nostalgia. And this guy comes up and he's demanding, "Do you know who I am?" He continued. "I'm the guy who supplies your dining hall." And this kind of hurries things along, which is to their benefit. But then once through, we ran toward the platform because we'd been ordered to, but also because we were anxious to get away before the memory police officers changed their minds. It was after 10 o'clock when we finally sat down to dinner that evening. And dinner was a little more than a plate of crackers, pickles, and a few slices of apple that we'd received as thanks from the mother and daughter on the train. The old man tried several times to skewer a pickle without success. Yeah, he's having a tough time with his hand, his fork stabbing at the empty air. And just when I thought he had one, he'd miss and then hit the plate and a tablecloth instead. So she's building this up again. "What's the matter?" I asked, but he didn't seem to hear me. "What's wrong?" I asked again, but he just continued his futile efforts. I could see that his mouth had gone slack and his lips were turning blue. But he says, "No, not at all. I'm just a little tired." And we know chapter 24 is the last time she sees him alive. So the more I read this, the more I go back on this. Maybe it is his wounds. At least that's what I'm hoping it is. Because if it's something else, yet again, I'm going to be surprised. Although I guess it would make sense, everything we've seen so far. But 24. So 2 weeks had passed, and the old man had finally recovered from the exhaustion of the trip to the cabin and the fright we'd had at the checkpoint. So here we go. He seems like he's doing better, but then he's not. I don't know. But we decided that we would not tell R what had happened at the station. And they carried them into the basement, lined them up on the work table, and tapped one with each hammer. The trick was to knowing how hard to hit them. For some, the light tap was enough to break the statue neatly in two, but for most of them, it was not nearly so simple. But in the end, we found that each statue concealed a single object different from the others. One was so tiny we almost failed to notice it. Another was wrapped in oiled paper. A third had a complicated shape. There was a black one, a sharp one, a fuzzy one, a thin one, a sparkly one, a soft one, ... And there were more objects than we could have been held in the drawers of the chest under the stairs. And when we brought the objects to R, arrayed on the tray, he greeted us from the bottom of the ladder, a grin on his face. I really like this aspect. So we have a character who knows exactly what everything is. But our protagonist and this old man, they have no idea. So they're very delicate with these. They're handling them with care, and that just gives so much comedy because they're probably just everyday things, but they have no idea. So they want to preserve them to show R, and he's grinning. So I'm thinking they're not a big deal. "I feel as though I'm dreaming," R said. "I never thought there would be so many of them. Oh, this bring back memories. I had one just like it. But with the disappearance came, my father burned it. And it's worth a fortune. We should take good care of it. Though I suppose we're not like to find any buyers, even if we did want to sell. But look, just touch this one. Don't be afraid. It feels wonderful. I'm not the one who needs these things. You two are." And the old man let out a low sigh as though he'd lost in thought. I truly believe they have the power to change you, to alter your hearts and minds. The slightest sensation can have an effect, can help you remember. These things will restore your memories. If we do remember something, said the old man, struggling to find words, what do we do then? Nothing in particular. We're all free to do as we choose with our own memories, R said. I suppose memories live here and there in the body. And no matter how wonderful the memory is, it vanishes if you leave it alone, if no one pays attention to it. They leave no trace, no evidence that they ever existed. I really love that because it's a reminder, right? To always remember the people we lost or the things that we've left behind. And so often in Western culture anyway, we're told to look to the future, right? We're all about the future. We're all about a progress. We're all about leaving the past behind, right? The past is over. There's nothing we can do to change it. But as they say, history repeats itself, right? So the past does have power. And that, I think, is what she's trying to, well, the author, being she, is trying to remind us of here. Because in this world, in this story, dwelling on the past is exactly what these people need. And our memories have been battered by the disappearances. And even now, when it's almost too late, we still don't realize the importance of things that have been lost. Indeed, indeed. But what if everything on the island disappears? Even if the whole island disappears, this room will still be here. Don't we have all the memories preserved here in this room? The emerald, the map, the photograph, the harmonica, the novel, everything. This is the very bottom of the mind swamp, the place where memories come to rest. And then several weeks passed, largely without incident. But thanks to the old man, because he's living there, she didn't have to worry about the house. But one day the drain got clogged and we were unable to run the water. And there was also a day when little Don Juan, the doggy, got sick. He had some kind of, sticky yellow liquid coming from one of his ears. But one other small event was the haircut the old man gave R. This was kind of a weird thing. He's like, I don't really cut hair, but, I'm good at it, I guess. I just, right here, he says, I'm not really. I just cut here and there, almost at random. And after this period of relative calm, I was walking Dawn one Saturday evening when I happened to meet the old man on the hill, not far from the ruins of the library. The library had been reduced to a mound of blackened rubble. What are you doing, sitting out here in the cold? I asked him. Looking at the boat, he said. It's been just the same since the day of the earthquake, half sunk out there, catching the waves as they raced ashore. But the part protruding above the water seems smaller today, as though it's been pulled under, though it may just be my imagination. Would you like to go back to your old life? No, not at all. I couldn't be happier living with you. And it's funny, seeing this, we're going over this again. That's why I love doing these videos. Is I'm seeing he's reflecting upon his life. Like, we know that he dies at the end of this chapter, and he's drawn back to the home. He's drawn back to the boat. He's seeing literally himself fade away into nothing. But here he says, I'm not watching the boat out of nostalgia, but to remind myself how lucky I am. I don't think so. I think he's concealing the truth from her. But since the old man had lost all his clothing in the tsunami, he was wearing things that had belonged to my father that I kept carefully stored away. Corduroy pants, a wool sweater, and an overcoat with a collar of artificial fur. And I've always loved his hands. From the time I was a little girl, they could make almost anything. A toy box, a plastic model, a cage for a rhinoceros beetle, a beanbag, a desk lamp, a bicycle seat cover, smoked fish, an apple cake. The knuckles were large and knobby, but his palms were pleasantly soft. One touch of these hands was enough to reassure me that no one was going to hurt me or leave me all alone. Another interesting thing about this passage is that she noted the boy's hands as well. So we have a young boy's hands, and she was being very motherly, trimming his nails, and she was very concerned about his hands. And now she's admiring this old man's hands, who are very protective to her personally. So we have kind of like a triptych sort of relationship, right? We have the child, the mother, and I guess the grandfather. Do you think we'll have trouble keeping the things we got from the sculptures, just as it was impossible to keep the boat? I don't know, he said, sitting slightly back on the pile. R seems to think he can keep anything in the hidden room. Sometimes I find myself wishing that the next thing to disappear would be the memory police themselves. Interesting. Is that a hint? Is this going to be a simulation? Is she writing the story? Is she going to be in total control? But what happens if the hidden room disappears before that happens, he says. I was at a loss for words, never having imagined what it would mean for the hidden room disappeared. If a time came when I no longer knew what was there under the rug, how to raise the trapdoor, why R was there to beneath her feet. The weird thing about this, the thing that struck me, is that when things disappear, it's something specific, right? Well, I mean, it could be a group of things, but it's a bird, it's books, things like that. This would be the disappearance of secret rooms. I guess it could make sense because we have people hiding away from the memory police, right? So now that I'm actually thinking aloud right now, that could be a possibility. Maybe these secret hiding places will disappear. Seems oddly specific considering all of the things that have disappeared so far, but you never know. The sun will be setting soon. Let's head home. You go on ahead. I'm going to rest here a while and then stop in another butcher shop on my way home. I found a place on the other side of the hill that's well stocked. I'm going to buy a nice ham. And he gives her the candy. He gives her the ramune. What's this? He asked, tilting his head and blinking. It's called ramune. It was in one of the sculptures that Anyways has left me with. And he notes that it's very sweet, and she gives him even more. Until later then. The old man smiled at me, still seated on the bricks. And that was the last time I saw him alive. Well, that was a tragic ending for this section, and we are going to finish out this book in the very next video. So let me know what you're thinking so far. What do you think is going to happen? I would love to know if you have any theories about what's going to happen. Is she going to be literally in control of everything because she is a writer? She is someone who can literally create things from thin air, or not because she doesn't have that power anymore because she is literally forgotten novels while novels have disappeared. What do you think the fate of the old man is? Did he die from his wounds, or did he die from the memory police, or even something else? Do you think the little secret room is going to disappear? That will be our next disappearance. I don't know, but we will find out in the very next video. So thanks again for reading along with me. I'm thoroughly enjoying this book, and I hope you are too. And don't forget, there's a Discord where we can chat even more about it. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next week with a dramatic conclusion of Yoko Ogawa's The Memory Police.